And then 20 years ago, there was crazy shenanigans with Tom Cruise, which brings us to our last story of the day. Tom Cruise interview from nearly 20 years ago sparks new debate about antidepressants and Scientology. And it's leaning in Tom's favor, folks. I mean, he got a lot of pushback regarding the Oprah Winfrey debacle when he started dating Katie Holmes. And then you had this right here with the Today Show, where he talked about antidepressants with Matt Lauer. If you don't remember, I'll show you the clip here in a moment. But there was an interview with Tom Cruise nearly 20 years ago, and it's resurfaced and sparked new debate about antidepressants and Scientology because there was a new study that came out, which we'll talk about in just one moment. But let's go ahead and roll the clip from Tom Cruise, one of the greats, as Donald Trump might say, with his kind of controversial statements with Matt Lauer. Let's roll it.
Here we are today, where I talk out against drugs and psychiatric abuses of electric shocking people, okay, against their will, of drugging children with them not knowing the effects of these drugs. Do you know what Adderall is? Do you know Ritalin? Do you know now that Ritalin is a street drug? Do you understand that?
The difference is this was not against her will, though. But this wasn't against Brooke's will.
Matt, I'm asking you a question.
I understand there's abuse of all of these things.
No, you see, here's the problem. You don't know the history of psychiatry. I do. All it does is mask the problem, Matt. And if you understand the history of it, it masks the problem. That's what it does. That's all it does. You're not getting to the reason why. There is no such thing as a chemical imbalance. I'm saying that drugs aren't the answer, that these drugs are very dangerous. They're mind-altering, antipsychotic drugs. And there are ways of doing it without that so that we don't end up in a brave new world.
Yes, there are abuses. And yes, maybe they've gone too far in certain areas. Maybe there are too many kids on Ritalin. Maybe electric shock.
Too many kids on Ritalin, Matt.
I'm just saying, but aren't there examples where it works?
Matt, you don't even, you're glib. You don't even know what Ritalin is. If you start talking about chemical imbalance, you have to evaluate and read the research papers on how they came up with these theories, Matt, okay? That's what I've done. And you go and you say, where's the medical test? Where's the blood test that says how much Ritalin you're supposed to get?
It's very impressive to listen to you because clearly you've done the homework and you know the subject.
And you should. And you should do that also because just knowing people who are on Ritalin isn't enough. You should be a little bit more responsible in knowing
I'm
really...
not prescribing Ritalin, Tom, and I'm not asking anyone else to do it.
Well, you are. You're saying... No,
I know some people who seem to have been helped by it.
But you're saying, but it's like, this is a very important issue.
This is a very,
and you know what, and you're here on the Today Show.
Right.
And to talk about it in a way of saying, well, isn't it okay, and being reasonable about it when you don't know, and I do. I think that you should be a little bit more responsible in knowing what it is, because you communicate to people.
Look, folks, I'm a big Tom Cruise fan. Some might say a groupie or part of the TC club, and I've been following him my entire life. And actually, oddly enough, I looked a lot like him when I was younger, which helped me get into acting. And because I look so much like him, it got me my first agent and manager. So I've been following him my entire life, even auditioning for roles that he did when he was younger to do student thesis films, short films, some feature films. So a lot of credit goes to him for being famous and getting me a really cool hobby, not a career, but a really fun hobby. And I'm sure, look, he probably looked at that footage and goes, I should have went about it a totally different way and looked back on the mistakes that he made. I'm not saying it was perfect. I'm not saying I agree in the way that he technically handled it. Could have been done way differently, but look, he wasn't really wrong because researchers from University College London released a study last week that concluded that there is no clear evidence that serotonin levels or serotonin activity is responsible for depression. Quote, the popularity of the chemical imbalance theory of depression has coincided with a huge increase in the use of antidepressants. Prescriptions for antidepressants has risen dramatically since the 1990s, with 1 in 6 adults in England and 2% of teenagers now being prescribed an antidepressant in a given year, which is crazy. Another quote here says, our view is that patients should not be told that depression is caused by low serotonin or by a chemical imbalance, and that they should not be led to believe that depressants work by targeting these unproven abnormalities. Sounds a lot like what Tom Cruise was saying, and sounds a lot like what Matt Lauer was pushing back on. So 20 years later, turns out Tom was pretty much right. And this led to many commentators online praising Cruise for his cautioning against antidepressants, with podcast host Michael Knowles saying this interview has aged like a fine wine, which is true. You also have Matt Walsh of the Daily Wire saying Tom Cruise has been mocked ruthlessly for the last 20 years, and yet everything he said was 100% undeniably true. Journalist Cheryl Atkinson added, not that long ago, people were allowed to say these things in America without being censored or canceled. Today, not so much. Still, this file tape survives, and thank God. I'm sure Tom is stoked about it as well, because now he's having a little bit of I don't know if the word reclamation is a good word to use, but hey, he's coming back in a good way in terms of being proven right. But this has led to other online commentators arguing that Cruz's position against antidepressants and psychiatry is the same stance as Scientology. Now, look, true could be both at the same time. Scientology could be preaching the same thing, and it just so happens to be true in real life as well. I'm not a Scientology fan. I'm not part of Scientology. I'm a Christian. But look, both could be true at the same time. But you had podcast host Eric Erickson tweeting, there's no reason to normalize Tom Cruise's statements on psychiatry because he is saying what you think. Cruise's position comes from Scientology, which very much should not be given credit or normalized. And then you have a former staff member of the Church of Scientology saying Tom Cruise's position isn't making the point that you think he's making. Behind a statement that psychiatric drugs only mask the problem lies in his belief that only Scientology can fix the problem, the real problem, i.e. the reactive mind and the body theatins. Again, both could be true at the same time. He was still correct in terms of what those drugs do, and it only masks the problem. Depression is a very serious thing. I know a lot of people that struggle with depression. Thank God I don't. And I don't necessarily believe that a drug should just mask the problem rather than fixing it, because once that drug is gone, then the problem's just back. And you see this a lot within the LGBTQ plus community, relying on certain drugs to just get through. And if it is helping them, great. But again, it needs to fix the problem and stop pushing a certain narrative upon people and telling them it's going to fix the problem or is fixing the problem, when in actuality, now we have a study done that doesn't necessarily make those statements true, since it was being pushed as truth long ago. So Tom Cruise is right. I'm sure he's happy for some sort of vengeance here, just even though he didn't really have part in that vengeance coming about, it just so happened to come to him. But, you know, he's $1 billion plus at the box office now with Maverick, and now he's having some sort of redemption here regarding his Matt Lauer Today Show clip. I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Bald Brad Show. If you did, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all our future content.